Chapter 6. Does God favor segregation? I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. 2 Cor. 6:16-17. From the beginning the Lord determined that his priesthood was to be an inheritance for those in a particular blood lineage, as explained by Abraham. I became a rightful heir, a high priest, holding the right belonging to the fathers. It was conferred upon me from the fathers, it came down from the fathers, from the beginning of time, yea, even from the beginning, or before the foundation of the earth, down to the present time, even the right of the firstborn, or the first man, who is Adam, or first father, through the fathers unto me. I sought for mine appointment unto the priesthood, according to the appointment of God unto the fathers concerning the seed. Abraham 1:2-4. Thus, Abraham received the priesthood through proper lineage and according to the appointment of God. It was in the premortal state that he and others were chosen to be ordained to the priesthood in mortality. Now the Lord had shown unto me, Abraham, the intelligences that were organized before the world was, and among all these there were many of the noble and great ones. And God saw these souls that they were good, and he stood in the midst of them, and he said, These I will make my rulers, for he stood among those that were spirits, and he saw that they were good, and he said unto me, Abraham, thou art one of them, thou wast chosen before thou wast born. Abraham 3:22-23. The Bible is not just a history, but more than that, it is the history of a family. That family gradually was divided into two general groups: Israel, they who prevail with God, and the Gentiles, unbelievers. The Gentiles are usually considered to be the more worldly and those who cannot accept the laws and commandments of God. They establish their own laws, customs, rules and gods. Their traditions have almost always run counter to and against those of the Israelitish people. Beginning with Cain and Abel, there have been two separate social, religious, and even bloodlines. God separated the nations by using boundaries and separated people by designating colors. He made some white, some black, yellow, brown, and red. Other separations are evident because of physical appearance, i.e., shape of nose and eyes, color or texture of hair, etc. Other distinguishing characteristics are intellects, talents, or physical abilities. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will shew thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people, according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. Deut. 32:7-9. Further evidence of God's use of segregation comes from the following. Now let's talk segregation again for a few moments. Was segregation a wrong principle? When the Lord chose the nations to which the spirits were to come, determining that some would be Japanese and some would be Chinese and some Negroes and some Americans, he engaged in an act of segregation. When he permitted the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael, again he indulged in segregation. In the case of Jacob and Esau, he engaged in segregation. When he preserved his people Israel in Egypt for 400 years, he engaged in an act of segregation, and when he brought them up out of Egypt and gave them their own land, he engaged in an act of segregation. We speak of the miracle of the preservation of the Jews as a separate people over all these years. It was nothing more or less than an act of segregation. I'm sure the Lord had his hand in it because the Jews still have a great mission to perform. In placing a curse on Laman and Lemuel, he engaged in segregation. When he placed the mark upon Cain, he engaged in segregation. When he told Enoch not to preach the gospel to the descendants of Cain as to the priesthood, he engaged in segregation. When he forbade intermarriages as he does in Deuteronomy 7th chapter, he established segregation. Who placed the Negroes originally in darkest Africa? Was it some man, or was it God? And when he placed them there, he segregated them. Who placed the Chinese in China? The Lord did. It was an act of segregation. When he placed only some of his chosen people in the tribe of Judah, the royal tribe, wasn't that an act of segregation? And when he gave the birthright only to Ephraim, wasn't that an act of segregation? Race Problems. Mark E. Peterson, pages 16-17. And even further. God Almighty did not create all races to exist as one big happy family, and of course, this is not happening, no matter how supportive the federal government may be of multiculturalism. People in general, no matter what race they may be, simply are not happy in this melting pot of multiculturalism, and there will continue to be acts of violence, riots, and unrest in all nations that persist in unbiblical integration policies. America's Promise. Dave Barley, page 3. It has been written by scientists and various scholars, i.e., Comte Joseph Arthur de Gobineau, that there is a distinct and inherent difference among races, such as physical makeup and structure, mental capacity, qualities of character, and sometimes intuitive or spiritual gifts. He said that it was the white race who was by nature superior to all the rest, and continued with, history shows that all civilization derives from the white race, that none can exist without its help, and that a society is great and brilliant only so far as it preserves the blood of the noble group that created it. People degenerate only in consequence of the various mixtures of blood which they undergo. Inequality of Human Races, Gobineau, page 210. Will and Ariel Durant gave another example. Usually this comes through intermarriage of the vigorous race with those whom it has conquered. Hence, the superiority of the whites in the United States and Canada, who did not intermarry, to the whites in Latin America, who did. All strong characters and peoples are race conscious and are instinctively averse to marriage outside their own racial group. The Lessons of History, Durant, page 26. In the book, The Passing of the Great Race, 1916, Madison Grant described the superior races as being the Scandinavians, Scythians, Baltic Germans, Englishmen, and Anglo-Saxon Americans. The Durants noted that between 1700 and 1848, white Americans north of Florida were mainly Anglo-Saxon, but after that the doors were opened and a racial fusion took place, and it appears that a new homogeneous type is forming which they think will emerge with a new language, different music, arts, and literature. He noticed that already these are visible. Ibid. Page 31. The question now is whether we are progressing or retrogressing because of this mixture of races. The mixing of blood may be a greater detriment to races than merely changing physical features or skin color. This probably applies more to the white race than any others, because it usually changes the religion, customs, and morals. It was so with King Solomon and many of the Jews, as the prophet Nehemiah testified. In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and of Moab. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves. Did not Solomon king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, and the covenant of the priesthood, and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, every one in his business. Nehemiah 13:23-30. God frequently reiterated his law to the Israelites not to mix with other nations, and warned them about the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor shew mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. Dut. 7:2-4. Mixed marriages between Israelites and Canaanites were a mark of apostasy. See Isa. 2:1, Dut. 14:2, Gen. 27:46, I Kings 8:53, Ezra 9:5, Judges 3:5-8, 2 Cor. 6:14-18, and in our dispensation, George Q. Cannon explained. This was a command that was given unto Israel with great force and emphasis. They were commanded from the beginning that they were not to marry with those who did not belong to their family, or did not belong to the Israel of God, or were not the covenant people of God. And it was not a new law, it was not a law that was given to Moses, and through him to the children of Israel for the first time. If you will read back to the days of Abraham, you will find that the same sentiment filled the heart of Abraham, the patriarch, concerning his posterity. When he wanted a wife for his son Isaac, he took his eldest servant of his house, and made him swear by the God of heaven, that he would not take a wife unto his son of the daughters of the Canaanites, a race with which he did not want his son to intermarry. And he sent his servant back to Mesopotamia, to his old country and his kindred, it being where his brother Nahor had lived, to find there for his son Isaac a wife that should be suitable to him. JD 25:363. At this point, we should discuss the controversy that appears in the story of Moses' plural wife. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. Numbers 12:1. The Lord apparently did not consider this marriage of Moses to be a sin. Rather, he rebuked Aaron and Miriam by putting a curse upon Miriam, so she became leprous and was shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. Num. 12:14. On the surface, it has been thought that this Ethiopian woman was of the black race. However, this appears improbable because, 1. God defended this marriage where he had previously commanded against marriages into the black race, and 2. Aaron later admitted to Moses that we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. 12:11. Just because someone was from the countries of Ethiopia or Canaan does not necessarily mean he or she is black. Those terms can also be used in a geographical sense. Consider the place where this incident happened. They abode at Hazarath, which is a barren region opposite the Red Sea indicated as Araba, which land was often traveled by Arabs. This is described in the Jewish Encyclopedia. The home of these marauding bands is vaguely indicated by the phrase "the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians." Vol. 241, C2 Kron. Sksai. 16. The Barnes Biblical Commentary stated that the marriage was not prohibited so long as she was not of the stock of Canaan. CX. 34:11-16. Barnes notes 1-208. This infers that Moses did not marry into the lineage of the blacks because he knew the law against it. Of course, he was greater than most prophets because the Lord said, "My servant Moses. Who is faithful in all mine house. And with him will I speak mouth to mouth." Num. 12:7-8, and this was after the incident with the Ethiopian woman who lived in or near Ethiopia. The renowned biblical scholar, Adam Clarke, clarified this problem. That woman, probably meaning Zipporah, who was an Arab born in the land of Midian, was the ostensible cause. Adam Clarke's Commentaries 1-657. Now it becomes more clear. There was a long-standing conflict between the Israelites and the Arabs. For Moses to marry an Arab was like marrying an enemy. Similar to a Mormon marrying a Southern Baptist, the conflict between the Israelites and the Arabs goes back to Abraham's wives, Sarah and Hagar, the Egyptian. Gen. 25:12, and it still continues. There was nothing wrong with marriages between these two genealogical lines, except for their intense dislike for each other. The Apostle Orson Pratt also disregarded the theory that the Ethiopian woman was black. His interpretation was that the marriage was satisfactory with both Moses and the Lord, and that Miriam's criticism was because of her jealousy over Moses's plural marriage. We read that, on a certain occasion the sister of Moses, Miriam, and certain others in the great congregation of Israel, got very jealous. What were they jealous about? About the Ethiopian woman that Moses had taken to wife, in addition to the daughter of Jethro, whom he had taken before in the land of Midian. How dare the great lawgiver, after having committed, according to the ideas of the present generation, a great crime, show his face on Mount Sinai when it was clothed with the glory of the God of Israel? But what did the Lord do in the case of Miriam, for finding fault with her brother Moses? Instead of saying, "You are right, Miriam, he has committed a great crime, and no matter how much you speak against him," he smote her with a leprosy the very moment she began to complain, and she was considered unclean for a certain number of days. Here the Lord manifested by the display of a signal judgment that he disapproved of any one speaking against his servants for taking more wives than one, because it may not happen to suit their notions of things. I make these remarks and wish to apply them to fault-finders against plural marriages in our day. Are there any Miriams in our congregation today, any of those who, professing to belong to the Israel of the latter days, sometimes find fault with the man of God standing at their head, because he not only believes in but practices this divine institution of the ancients? If there be such in our midst, I say, remember Miriam the very next time you begin to talk with your neighboring women, or anybody else against this holy principle. Remember the awful curse and judgment that fell on the sister of Moses when she did the same thing, and then fear and tremble before God, lest he, in his wrath, may swear that you shall not enjoy the blessings ordained for those who inherit the highest degree of glory. JD 13:189. In many countries, white people are hated, which is nothing new. People living in nations surrounding the Israelites hated them and made war upon them whenever they got the chance. This conflict began between the children of Cain and the children of Seth, and it has continued up to the present time. But it is not necessarily the fault of the white man, it is a problem that can be traced back to Lucifer himself, because he is opposed to the promised heritage that is associated with the white race. Since God is responsible for this lineage problem, it is really God they hate. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I the Lord thy God am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. X. 25. So why does the white man seem to arouse opposition so frequently? It is a natural, and even spiritual, conflict created by the powers of darkness against the chosen lineage and the holy priesthood of God. One of the reasons that Israel was told to separate themselves from other peoples and nations is because the laws of God were so strict and the punishments so severe that other races could not accept them. Even the Israelites had trouble obeying all God's laws. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, and Amorites, and Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Balaam in the groves. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Chushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Chushan-Rishathaim 8 years. Judges 3:4-8. In the days of Jeroboam, he and other leaders placed the lowest of the people as priests of the high places, and it was not even by any choice. It was whosoever would, he consecrated him, and he became one of the priests of the high places. Kings 13:33, they were placing people into priestly offices and giving the priesthood to them without the consent of the Lord. Later they added sin to sin by mixing their blood with other nations. By then the Lord was totally disgusted with them and allowed them to be taken captive by these other nations. In 721 BC the 10-tribed house of Israel in Samaria fell to their enemies, and they were taken, by the millions, into the regions of the Black and Caspian seas. The Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. 2 Kings 17:23. Those deported Israelites became known as the lost sheep of the house of Israel, or the 10 lost tribes. Rather than repeat their same blunders today, we need to obey the same laws they were told to obey, as was recommended by Mark E. Peterson. I think the Lord segregated the Negro, and who is meant to change that segregation? It reminds me of the scripture on marriage. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Only here we have the reverse of the thing: what God hath separated, let not man bring together again. Race Problems. Peterson, page 23. Israelites have been given at least 5 major laws that pertain to important doctrines of their gospel. 1. They are to gather together. 2. They are to abandon all the customs, traditions, and laws that come from Babylon and are contrary to the gospel. 3. They are to carry the gospel to the elect of Israel, those who are the strongest in doctrine and principle. 4. They are not to marry unbelievers of the gospel nor foreigners who have their own religious beliefs. 5. They are not to marry Canaanites, or those with black bloodlines. To many, these are somewhat peculiar beliefs, but they dominate the revelations of the Lord, the teachings of the prophets, and the practices of the people called Israel. Peculiar is the word used by the Lord himself to describe the Israelites, as the following scriptures show. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. X. 19:5. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth. Deut. 14:2. And the Lord hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee, and that thou shouldest keep all his commandments. Deut. 26:18. For the Lord hath chosen Jacob unto himself, and Israel for his peculiar treasure. Psalms 135:4. In other words, the rest of the world would not believe nor act like them. This would, of course, cause some friction and controversy and even wars. It made them peculiar. One of the first miraculous things God did for the Israelites was to separate them from the Egyptians. He wanted to gather them together, away from other nations. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. Ex. 33:16. This same doctrine of separation and segregation had been taught to the children of Adam and Eve, for Adam gave the following patriarchal instructions to his son, Seth. But now, O Seth, my son, place thyself at the head of thy people, tend them and watch over them in the fear of God, and lead them in the good way. Command them to fast unto God, and make them understand they ought not to hearken to Satan, lest he destroy them. Then, again, sever thy children and thy children's children from Cain's children. Do not let them ever mix with those nor come near them either in their words or in their deeds. Adam and Eve 8:14-15. We can see in the life of Abraham that other nations and people, firm in their Gentile beliefs, usually become opposed to those who do not compromise and join with them, often leading to war and death. Abraham was captured by such people and was to be killed. Therefore they turn their hearts to the sacrifice of the heathen in offering up their children unto these dumb idols, and hearkened not unto my voice, but endeavored to take away my life by the hand of the priest of Elkanah. The priest of Elkanah was also the priest of Pharaoh. Now, at this time it was the custom of the priest of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to offer up upon the altar which was built in the land of Chaldea, for the offering unto these strange gods, men, women, and children. Abraham 1:7-8. But the voice of Jehovah spoke to Abraham and said, Abraham, Abraham, behold my name is Jehovah, and I have heard thee, and have come down to deliver thee, and to take thee away from thy father's house, and from all thy kinsfolk, into a strange land which thou knowest not of. And this because they have turned their hearts away from me. Therefore I have come down to visit them, and to destroy him who hath lifted up his hand against thee, Abraham, my son, to take away thy life. Behold, I will lead thee by my hand, and I will take thee, to put upon thee my name, even the priesthood of thy father, and my power shall be over thee. Abraham 1:16-18. Then God smashed the altar, killed the priest, and brought a famine in the land to make everyone suffer for consenting to Abraham's death. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee, and in thee, that is, in thy priesthood, and in thy seed, that is, thy priesthood, for I give unto thee a promise that this right shall continue in thee, and in thy seed after thee, that is to say, the literal seed, or the seed of the body, shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Even with the blessings of the gospel, which are the blessings of salvation, even of life eternal. Abraham 2:11. Such blessings to Abraham were to be handed down to his children, or literal seed, if they would obey the laws of God. He was called to separate his family from out of the Ur of Chaldees, and keep them from mixing with other nations. God told him, I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant. Gen. 17:7. The holy priesthood was the birthright of Abraham and of his posterity if they would honor it. The covenant with Abraham and his generations was that, this is my covenant, which ye shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee, every man-child among you shall be circumcised. Gen. 17:10. The most probable reason for this drastic action was to remind them that they were not to mix their seed with those of forbidden lineages. The Lord had demanded a pure lineage all through the Old Testament. The scriptures tell us that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Gen. 6:9. This is an indication that Noah was clean and moral, which was different from the rest of the world, for it is said that God looked upon the earth, and, behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Gen. 6:12. It was a common weakness for mortals to corrupt their flesh by whoredoms, adultery, and marrying strange wives. Another more recent example of why God has always favored segregation is shown in the case of the infusion of black slave trade that came into Portugal. By the middle of the 16th century, Portugal had risen to a position analogous to that of the United States today. Portugal was the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world, with a large empire and colonies in Asia, Africa, and America. The Portuguese people were, like the Elizabethan, in England, poets and explorers, a race of highly civilized, imaginative, intelligent, and daring men. They showed great potential, and had already made important contributions to the Renaissance. But, unlike England and other European countries, Portugal had a large and rapidly growing Negro population, and at the same time its white population was declining. Portugal began the Negro slave trade after encountering Negroes in its explorations and forays into Africa. There was no taboo or injunction against sexual religions with Negroes, and the Negro blood soon became assimilated into the general population through miscegenation, so that today there are no Negroes, as such, in Portugal. The Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th ed. 1911, in its article on Portugal, states, the Portuguese intermarried freely with their slaves, and this infusion of alien blood profoundly modified the character and physique of the nation. It may be said without exaggeration that the Portuguese of the age of discoveries and the Portuguese of the 17th and later centuries were two different races. The contribution of this new race to civilization in terms of literature, art, music, philosophy, sciences, etc., has been practically zero. Portugal today is the most backward country in Europe. The illiteracy rate is 38%, in the US 2.2%, Soviet Union 1.5%, Japan 1.0%. The infant mortality rate in Portugal is 59.2 per 1,000 births, in Sweden 12.9, US 20.7, France 20.4, Soviet Union 28. Portugal is a forgotten land bypassed by tourists and shunned by scholars. It is a sad country, known mainly for its plaintive, mournful fado music, nostalgic music that looks to the past and sees no future. The Black Man's Gift to Portugal, author unknown, org. printed in 1971, taken from pages 2 to 4. Although Abraham Lincoln was considered a savior in his efforts to deliver the black man from slavery in the United States, it was nevertheless his intention to keep the blacks and whites separated. In an address to a group of black men on the subject, he once said, "You and we are different races. We have between us a broader difference than exists between almost any other two races. Whether it is right or wrong I need not discuss, but this physical difference is a great disadvantage to us both, as I think your race suffers very greatly, many of them by living among us, while ours suffers from your presence. In a word, we suffer on each side." If this is admitted, it affords a reason at least why we should be separated. New York Daily Tribune, August 15, 1862. The racist ideology is a conviction within the various races. Each has a certain sense of pride in his own kind. Natives of such countries as Germany, Russia, Japan, China, Arabia, and America have all expressed their national pride and their wish to excel above the others. The decline and fall of Israel came about through the mixing of their seed with forbidden races, who influenced Israel to change their laws and customs, eventually to apostatize from their religion. We see the effects of this today.